Hey Econ, this is one of your final videos of Chapter 11. In this video we're going to talk about the macroeconomy, as your book calls it, the modern Keynesian view. Go back in the last couple videos to talk about the classical model and the Keynesian model. We're going to go ahead and talk about the modern Keynesian model, and the modern Keynesian model has a few curves, some of which we've addressed, and some of which are going to look new. The first thing to notice is that we're dealing with price level and output just like normal, but that our supply curve, this is what we're going to call our short run aggregate supply curve, or in this video and from now on we'll call it SRAS. Some things to notice here is that this short run aggregate supply curve has aspects of the Keynesian viewpoint of sticky wages. It also has viewpoints of the classical model. At some point we run out of resources and we run out of time in the day, so it has like a vertical aspect, and then it has a positive sloping aspect, which is reminiscent of our discussions on chapters 3 and 4 in just regular supply and demand. And we are going to add in our other supply curve here, and that vertical line here represents our long run aggregate supply, or LRAS. And then lastly, we are going to draw our aggregate demand curve. And for this, you're going to ignore this recessionary gap thing up here for a second. But this is really nice, this intersection right here. When you have all three of these lines meeting, when you have aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply, and long run aggregate supply all meeting, what you have is a point right there. We're going to call that the equilibrium price level. And this is also the long run aggregate supply, or sorry, our long run level of output, which matches up with long run aggregate supply. So we're going to do that YE, Y sub E, or PL sub E. And this is nice. Like, this is what we call full employment output production. This is the economy operating at full employment. And remember, that's not zero unemployment. This is full employment. It means that there's still going to be frictional and structural unemployment. And this is just so nice, but it's not what we came to this class to talk about. If this is how the economy was all the time, then, man, what would be the point? So we're going to get rid of some of those things, and we're going to look at what the economy looks like in a recession. Let me draw the rest of these lines in. So let's say we're in a recession, and how we know we're in a recession is if we are to the left of our long run aggregate supply curve. All the points in this section are all representative points inside the production possibilities curve, and all the points out here are things that are outside the production possibilities curve. And so in a recession we would look like this. You see that our point, our level of output, is Y1 right there, and it's less than full employment, right? This means we have some unemployment. And also, if we draw a line over here to the price level, we see the price level is a little bit lower than it was, but that is equilibrium price level in the short run. So this is our current level of output. But let's say we want to intervene in this economy. There's a couple things we can do. We need to be on this long run curve. So how do we do this? Most people would say, well, why doesn't the government do something? Well, let's try that first. Let's say the government, remember aggregate demand is components of C plus I plus G plus X. So any number of these things changing, if people decide to consume more, if there's more autonomous investment, if the government decides to spend money, or if there's an increase in net exports towards the positive, then we would see aggregate demand shift outward, and potentially we could eliminate that recessionary gap that existed, and we could be at 82. And AD2, or aggregate demand 2, represents our new aggregate demand curve after we've increased government spending, let's say. That government spending is very nice. It's caused our economy to move to a point of equilibrium, and we have PLE, or the equilibrium price level, and we have the equilibrium level of output. And that's really nice. That's really great. That's a Keynesian viewpoint. A Keynesian would argue that increasing aggregate demand is the best way to move our curve up, and then we end up at equilibrium. But if you're following this, you notice there's another way to do this. we've covered the components of aggregate demand and why it shifts in the previous video, so if you need to go back and understand why it increases, that's fine. But one thing we have yet to talk about is aggregate supply and why shortened aggregate supply would shift. So again, let me draw these lines. Let's say instead of shifting aggregate demand, we did nothing. If we do nothing, what happens? The answer is not nothing. If we do nothing, if the government decides to just let the economy fix itself, a classical economist would say, hooray, first off, because classical economists argue that interfering with the economy is bad. Remember, laissez-faire. But if we do nothing, what's going to happen? Well, firms are looking at this from this perspective. They have, prices are okay, output is not as good as they want it to be. So what we have inflationary expectations. Prices are a little bit higher than they should be, so if we increase supply now, then we can make more money. Remember, that's one of the components of supply is, back in chapters 3 and 4. If we have expectations of the price being higher today than it is in the future, then we are going to output more today. Also, you could argue about wages here. If people are working here, that means there's unemployment, and workers know that, and firms know that, so they're going to want to decrease the price of wages and decrease the prices. This is assuming that wages and prices are flexible, which Keynes argued against. But for any of those reasons, amongst other things like the discovery of new materials or increased competition, that's representative of this, by the way. If we have competition among workers, then that will drive down wages. Then we will see a shift from SRAS 1 to SRAS 2. If there's fewer regulations on businesses, perhaps you could see an increase in short and aggregate supply. Or if there's a decrease in taxes on business, a reduction in trade barriers like tariffs and stuff like that, or a reduction in any input price, that's going to cause an increase in aggregate supply. And that's how you could eliminate a recessionary gap. Now, both of those have their pros and cons. And in the aggregate demand model, price went up, and that's bad for some people. And in the short and aggregate supply curve, the price went down, and that's also bad for some people because that's your wages, right? So reaching this full employment output is very nice, but to get there is kind of difficult. In the next video, we're going to discuss the inflationary gap. One thing I want to add here is really quick is that when AD increased it, we called that demand pull inflation. Remember when demand went up, that was demand pull inflation. You can read that from the textbook. But next video, inflationary gaps.